Okay, let me just set myself up. Okay. Well, good afternoon, comrades. I'm going to address specifically the origins and nature of Zionist ideology. Zionism has, if you like, three arms. There is the Zionist movement. It is a Zionism constitutes a movement which is active all over the world, virtually. Zionism has a project of colonizing Palestine. But it has an ideology, and the ideology plays a very important part in the whole endeavor of Zionism. You cannot understand what Zionism is doing. You cannot understand its history. You cannot understand its nature without looking at its very peculiar and, let us say, exceptional, anomalous ideology compared with other movements with which it can be compared. And I'll come to that later, what family of phenomena Zionism belongs to. And in this respect, it is useful to distinguish two aspects of Zionism. I mentioned before the two arms, the three, as it were, the three natures of Zionism as a movement, as a project, and as an ideology. But now I want to concentrate on a different classification. I don't know how to call it. The two aspects of Zionism, I've given it the provisional titles of pull and push. The pull aspect and the push aspect. Let me explain what I mean by this. Under the pull aspect, I understand its activity, especially in the Jewish diaspora all over the world, in which it appears or wants to present itself as a national movement of the Jews. And as I should discuss in a moment, this in itself is a very problematic self-definition. But why do I call it the pull aspect of Zionism? Because in this aspect, Zionism is appealing to the Jews all over the world outside Palestine and tries to pull them away, either physically to pull them away, persuade them to immigrate to Palestine and later to Israel, but also pulling them away to distinguish themselves as an alleged separate nation from the surrounding societies in which they live. That is, pulling them away. The push aspect of Zionism is embodied in its project of colonization, in which it pushes itself into the territory that it considers it has a claim to, or the Jewish people, or as it claims, the Jewish nation has a claim to possess. Now, I'll start with the pull aspect of Zionism. Zionism modeled itself on 19th century Eastern and Central European nationalism. It regarded itself as the nationalism of the Jews. The ideological project of any nationalism is to invent, if you like, the nation for which it claims to speak, who counts as a member of that nation. This is not always clear. If you talk about the nationalism of some nationality, let us say the Ukrainian nationality in Eastern Europe, who counts as a member of the Ukrainian nation? That's not a clear-cut question. So the one ideological part of the project of nationalism is to specify who counts as a member of the nation on which it claims to speak. To provide this collective, this community of people with a narrative of common origin, a claim to a homeland, and a claim to a common destiny. And this then is used to claim possession of and sovereignty over the homeland which it claims to have rights to. Now, in this connection, Zionism, if you compare it with the Eastern and Central European nationalisms of the 19th century, with which it likes to be compared, which it tries to emulate, you encounter immediately two anomalies. First of all, the question is, do Jews constitute a nation in any case? In the first place, I mean, is Jewishness a religion or a national category? I'll come to this question in a moment. And then territory. I mean, in the case of the nationalisms with which Zionism liked to compare itself originally in Eastern and Central Europe, the territory was more or less given. It's a territory where the members of the nation or the alleged nation actually live. Of course, the borders or the frontiers of this territory which national movement claimed were not normally very clear. It also, depends on who you count as member of this nation and what exactly are the borders of the territory to which it has a right or allegedly has a right to possess. Let me return to the former question. Are the Jews a nation? We are talking about the early 20th century, when Zionism came into being. In fact, the late 19th century. The Zionist movement formally was established in 1897 in a congress that was held in Basel in Switzerland. So we are talking about late 19th, early 20th century. Are the Jews a nation? Well, the answer is it depends. It depends which Jews you are talking about, where the question is raised. In the same year, the Zionist movement was formally established in 1897. There was also established the Bund, the foremost Jewish workers' organization in the Russian Empire. It was formed in the same, as it happened, in the same year. A year later, it helped to found the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, in which it was initially a constituent part and was granted the right to be an autonomous national section. I mean, the Bund claimed to represent the Jewish nationality. And it retained for a number of years the right to be recognized as an autonomous national section within the new Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, RSDLP. But in the second Congress of the party in 1903, the majority Bolshevik faction of the party, led by Lenin, had this right of the Bund revoked, and the Bund thereupon split from the party. It rejoined the party later on in 1906 in the Sixth Congress, in which the Bolshevik faction was actually a minority. Lenin conducted a polemic with the Bund, trying to show that, or trying to argue why the Bund cannot be recognized as a national organization. The article, which you can find it on the internet, Lenin's article polemicizing with the Bund. Let me see. The position of the Bund in the party, published in October 1903. You can find it very easily on the internet. Now, reading Lenin's argument against the Bund, I find that it's one of the weakest articles Lenin ever wrote. I mean, the argument really is that he puts forward is really very weak. In support of, I mean, Lenin claims the Jews are not a nation. In support of his claim, he quotes two people. He quotes, first of all, Kautsky. So here is what Lenin quotes Kautsky as saying, quote, "The Jews have ceased to be a nation, for a nation without territory is unthinkable." And Lenin adds, this is what one of the most prominent Marxist theoreticians says, Karl Kautsky. Quite recently, examining the problem of nationality in Austria, the same writer, that is Kautsky, says Lenin, endeavored to give a scientific definition of the concept of nationality and establish two principal criteria of nationality, language and territory. A nation must have a common language and must be located in a common territory. Lenin also quotes Jewish socialist Nake, Alfred Nake, from an article Nake published, actually must have been a few days before Lenin's own article, because it was published just the month before. Nake is arguing against Bernard Lazare, who did claim that the Jews do constitute a nationality. Bernard Lazare, by the way, was a kind of Zionist, but wasn't really a Zionist. He initially was very impressed with Theodor Herzl, the founder of political Zionism and traveled together with him, but later disclaimed any relation with the Zionist movement. By the way, he was politically an anarchist. Nevertheless, he claimed that the Jews constitute a nation. And this is what Naquet says in a polemic against Lazar. By the way, the polemic was published a few days after Lazar, as it happened, died. So Naquet speaks about Lazar in the past tense, because by the time his article was published, Lazar was no longer alive. And this is what Lenin quotes Lazar as saying. And this is, in fact, you can find the original, Naquet, you can find the original Naquet article also on the internet. If it pleases Bernard, if it pleased in the past Bernard Lazar to consider himself a citizen of a separate nation, that is his affair. But I declare that although I was born a Jew, I do not recognize Jewish nationality. I belong to no other nation but the French. And this indeed was the prevailing notion in France, among the Jews of France and England, Germany, etc. So what is Lenin claiming? That in fact, Lenin is arguing at cross purposes with the Bund, because what Kautsky and Naquet correctly claimed was that the totality of the Jews all over the world do not constitute a nation. That is quite true. They don't have a common language. That's evidently true. It was true then, and it's certainly true today. And they don't live in the same territory. They are spread all over the world. But the Bund's claim to represent a nationality was not based on the idea that Jews all over the world constitute a nation. In fact, the Bund wasn't interested in the Jews of United States, of the Jews of France, the Jews of England. The Bund, as its name suggests, were interested in the Jewish people living in Lithuania, Poland, and Russia. The Bund, the word Bund means federation. The full name of this movement, of early movement of the Jewish proletariat in Eastern Europe, was the General Jewish Labor Bund, or Labor Federation, of Lithuania, Poland, and Russia. Their claim was not, they never were interested in asserting that the Jews living all over the world constitute a single nationality. They were, what their claim was that the Jews in that part of the world do constitute a nationality. Now, if Lenin had taken the trouble to apply the criteria that he himself quotes from Kautsky for a nationhood, he would find that his assertion that the Jews in the area represented by the Bund do not constitute a nationality is very weak. Because, first of all, they did have a common language, Yiddish. Yiddish was not the language of the Jews all over the world. It was the language of the Jewish people living in Lithuania, Poland, and Russia. They had a secular culture there, a thriving literature. By the time Lenin was writing, 1903, there was a thriving secular literature, including socialist literature in the language of the Jewish people in that area, Yiddish. So the claim that the Jews do not have a common language fails if you are thinking of the Jews in the area represented by the Bund. As for being concentrated in a territory, having a common territory, well, that is a moot question. There were certainly areas within that territory that I mentioned, in which at least in a mosaic of locations, the Jews constituted the majority of the population. Let me mention the facts from the history of my own family. My paternal family comes from an area nowadays, I think in Belarus, from a town called Mogilev. My maternal family hails from originally from a town near Vitebsk. As it happens, these two places are close together, although my father and mother met only when they immigrated to Palestine, but their families happened to originate in a very close together. Now, in both Mogilev and Vitebsk, the Jews constituted 52% of the population. In a town called Pinsk, not far away, it's further to the west, the birthplace of Chaim Weizmann, who became the first president of Israel. The Jews constituted 74% of the population. Now, it's true that there is no continuous, one continuous area in which the Jews do constitute a majority of the population. It's more like a jigsaw or a patchwork. But this was typical of many ethnic groups or several ethnic groups in that part of the world. So Lenin's claim that the Bund doesn't represent a true nationality is not quite so strong as he thought. However, when we come to the Zionist movement, its claim was that the Jews, not only in that part of the world, but all over the world, constitute a single nationality. And in this aspect, if you put the question in this way, then of course the arguments of Kautsky and Nake are perfectly correct. It is a very strange idea to claim status of nationality for a group whose only common denominator is affiliation to a certain religion. After all, how do you become Jewish? There is one single way of becoming Jewish, and that was true then as it is true now. You undergo religious conversion. If you're not born Jewish, if you're not born to a Jewish mother specifically, then you can become Jewish by religious conversion. Where did the Zionist ideology get the idea that the Jews are a nation? This is the question that I am posing now. And the answer is quite obvious. The origin of the claim that the totality of Jews constitute a nation is the Bible, the Old Testament. I would like, here I'm repeating something that I wrote in a recent article in the Weekly Worker, a couple of weeks ago, I think. I quoted there from a recent article of an Israeli historian, Yitzhak Konforty, who is an expert on the role of the Bible, the Old Testament, in the formation of Zionism. His article is entitled Zionism and the Hebrew Bible, From Religious Holiness to National Sanctity. Let me quote a passage from his article. His article was actually published quite recently. The Zionist consciousness of the Jewish past is powerfully connected with the Bible. Of the canonic Jewish texts, which include the Mishnah, Talmud, mystical literature, rabbinical literature, Jewish philosophy, poetry, and sacred poetry, that's both secular and sacred poetry, the Bible stands out for its ability to connect the modern concept of nationalism with the ancient Jewish past. In fact, Zionism, which was a mainly ostensibly secular movement, did not show any interest in the other main texts of the Jewish religion. By the way, for the Orthodox Jews who actually subscribe to the rabbinical dominant rabbinical form of Judaism, the main text which interests them is not the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew Bible is something that is covered, in the first few years of religious school. The main text that is studied in yeshivot, in rabbinical religious colleges, is the Talmud, not the Hebrew Bible. Of course, the Hebrew Bible is read in the synagogue every Saturday, a portion from the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. One portion after the other is read or chanted in the synagogue. But that's about it. It's not intensively studied as the Talmud is. But for the Zionist movement, the Hebrew text which interested above all from the classical Hebrew text is precisely the Hebrew Bible. Let me continue the quotation from Conforti. The Bible stands out for its ability to connect the modern concept of nationalism with the ancient Jewish past. From its inception, Jewish national thought viewed the Bible as a deeply inspirational source for the education and formation of the new Jew, quote unquote. Zionist thinkers viewed the Bible as a foundational document and guide for Jewish nationalism. The two main revolutions that Zionism initiated, adoption of the Hebrew language and return to the land of Israel, reflect the position of the Bible within Zionism. In fact, what he claims quite correctly is that in the formation of Zionism, although ostensibly a secular movement, the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, played a seminal and fundamental functional role. He rightly claims, by the way, that nationalism, even when it claims to be a secular movement, and this applies to all nationalism, is in a sense analogous to religion. The psychology of nationalism is very often analogous to the psychology of religious adherence. I think that there's a lot of truth in this. Conforti also points out an interesting fact, namely that the Old Testament played a seminal part ideologically in the formation of some early national movements or national formations in the West. He mentions in particular Dutch nationalism. We are talking about 17th century national Dutch nationalism or Dutch patriotism, which, according to some historians, stressed its analogy with the ancient Palestine or ancient Canaan under the sovereignty of the children of Israel. The same applies also to England. The notion of the English as the new Israelite nation and the true chosen people appears in texts in English proto-nationalist texts of the 17th century. Anyway, but certainly in Zionist quasi-nationalism, the importance of the model of the Bible was absolutely crucial. So the idea that the Jews all over the world constitute a nation is really borrowed from the texts of the Old Testament, in which the Jews are referred to as the nation of God. Let me okay. Yes, what I want to add at this point is that the Old Testament is an ancient document that originates from a time in which the notion of ethnicity and religion were more or less coterminous. It was, or the main parts of the Old Testament were composed at a time, in a period of antiquity, in which the typical situation was not, as we have today, a religion which cuts across nationhood. You have the concept of nationhood and religion completely independent of one another. A given nation can have members of various religions, and a religion can apply or can be practiced by people of different nationalities. The Hebrew Bible was composed and edited in a period of history in which each ethnic group came, as it were, in the same package as a given religion. It's a kind of a tribal arrangement. You have a tribe or an ethnic group. It could be an ethnic group with its own state, and it had also its own religion. This concept of coterminality, of identity between a religion and an ethnic group is preserved in the Hebrew Bible. And so for the Zionist movement, it was natural, or it came as an easy deduction to make that, yes, we are, as the Bible says, we are a religion, but also a national group. Of course, this is quite contrary to what happened in the what dominates in the modern world, where, as I said, nation and ethnicity are not coterminous. By the way, let me go back to the Bund. The Bund was mainly concerned with rejecting Zionism in its full aspect. The Zionists claim that the Jews are not only a separate nation, but that they should detach themselves from the society in which they live, from the countries in which they live. They should go away from here. The Bund said, no, I mean, our homeland is where we live. We are a nation, yes, but this is our homeland. It was expressed in the Yiddish word Darkheit, here-ness. We are rooted here. It is significant that they were not really interested in rejecting Zionism in its push capacity. That is to say, I don't know of many significant arguments by the Bund. Maybe I'm mistaken. I haven't read, obviously, all the Bundist literature. They argue against the notion of Zionism that Jews should go away from where we live and go and settle elsewhere. But I don't find any strong argument or well-known argument by the Bund against the Zionism as a colonialist movement. This, by the way, this kind of rejection of Zionism is also very common today among various Jewish communities, especially the United States. In the United States, it is quite common to find Jews who are not Zionists. That is to say, they reject the full claim of Zionism. They don't regard themselves as a separate nationality in the United States. Their homeland is the United States. They don't look for a different homeland. They belong to the American nation. However, they don't necessarily criticize or display any resistance to the or any objection or any opposition to Israel as in its colonial project. In fact, it's very common to find, and I come across this very often among American Jews who are not Zionists in the full sense. They don't want to go away from the United States to live elsewhere, but they on the other hand express quite deep attachment to Israel and even go as far as justifying its colonization of Palestine. That's okay with them. They are not interested in rejecting Zionism in its push aspect. They only don't want to take part in its pull aspect. They are quite content to be to regard the United States as their homeland. Okay. So as I say, embalmed or fossilized in Judaism is the antique unity of ethnicity and religion. And so is the push aspect of Zionism, the colonizing project, the promised land. This is also fossilized within the Old Testament. So to sum up this part of my talk, Zionist ideology from the start, even if in its secular guise, was derived from a religious source. And this remains true. I expressed it on one occasion in the following form: even when Zionism had a secular ego, it always had a religious id. That is to say, deep down, Zionism has religious roots, ancient religious roots, which it never could disconnect itself from. It was inherent in the actual founding idea of Zionism. Now, turning to the push aspect of Zionism and its debt to the Old Testament as a source of its ideology. The claim of Zionism to possess the land of Palestine is basically a form of relying on the divine promise of Yahweh to the alleged, to the putative patriarchs of the Jewish people. This divine promise trumps the rights of the indigenous people. The patriarchs in the book of Genesis, which I would like to quote a couple of paragraphs from, the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham, his son Isaac, and Isaac's son Jacob. They are repeatedly described as strangers in the land of Canaan. That is what the land was called in the book of Genesis, and the other early books of the Old Testament. This is repeatedly stressed in the original text, although modern Zionists who quote the Bible as the source of one of the sources of their alleged claim of the Jewish people to the land of Palestine, they avoid mentioning that the divine promise, which they like to quote, actually mentions the fact that this promise is given to people who come from elsewhere. They are strangers in this land. Here is a quote from Genesis chapter 17. This is one of the early mentions of the divine promises made by the God Yahweh to Abraham, the putative forefather of the Jews. Quote, "And I will establish my covenant between me and thee," that is Abraham, "and thy seed, descendants, after thee, in their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto thee, and to thy seed after thee. And I will give unto thee, and to thy seed after thee, the land wherein thou art a stranger, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God." Now, funnily enough, you can find in the internet a rather amusing video in which Danny Danon, a representative of Israel in the Security Council, makes a speech in which he argues the right of the Jews to the land of the entire land of Palestine. In his speech, he quotes from the Bible, first of all, the complete paragraph that I just quoted, but in Hebrew. And then he said, well, obviously the members of the Security Council don't understand biblical Hebrew. So he takes the trouble to give them a translation. He uses the King James version. But he quotes it with one significant change. He says, I will give unto thee and to thy seed all the land of Canaan. He stresses all the land of Canaan. The whole land belongs to us, but he omits the significant phrase, the land wherein thou art a stranger. The idea of the Old Testament is that the promise of Yahweh to the Abraham and his descendants trumps the rights of the indigenous people, and this idea is repeated several times in the book of Genesis and in Exodus. This is not something that Zionists like to stress or to admit. What are the limits of the land, promised land that Yahweh promised to Abraham and his seed? I'm quoting now from another passage in Genesis chapter 15, verse 18. Unto thy seed I have given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates. This is quite a big territory. Okay. Now, how does the Old Testament describe the fulfillment of this promise? After a long interval in which the family of Abraham and his grandson Jacob and his descendants go down to Egypt, spend 400 years in Egypt initially as guests and later as enslaved people. They finally emerged by a sequence of miracles led by Moses. And this is what happens when they start their trek from Egypt to the promised land. I quote from the book of Numbers, that is the fourth book of the Bible, chapter 33. When you cross the Jordan into Canaan, drive out all the inhabitants of the land before you, destroy all their carved images and their cast idols, and demolish all their high places. Take possession of the land and settle in it, for I have given you the land to possess. Then another passage which I'd like to quote, that is from the fifth book of the Bible, Deuteronomy, chapter 20. And this is going to be quite a long quote, so please bear with me. This is Yahweh talking to the Israelites via their leader Moses. When you march up to attack a city, make its people an offer of peace. If they accept and open their gates, all the people in it should be subject to forced labor and shall work for you. If they refuse to make peace and they engage you in battle, lay siege to that city. When Yahweh your God delivers it unto your hand, put to the sword all the men in it. As for the women, the children, the livestock, and everything else in the city, you may take these as plunder for yourselves, and you may use the plunder Yahweh your God gives you from your enemies. This is how you are to treat all the cities that are at a distance from you and do not belong to the nations nearby. What about the nations living nearby? That is to say, in the land of Canaan itself. Here the text continues. However, in the cities of the nations Yahweh your God is giving you as an inheritance, do not leave alive anything that breathes. Completely destroy them. The Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, etc., etc. Otherwise, destroy them. Otherwise, they will teach you to follow all the detestable things they do in worshiping their gods, and you will sin against Yahweh your God. That is to say, it's a religious injunction to demolish, to annihilate all the inhabitants. Don't leave anyone alive. In fact, in the next book of the Hebrew Bible, the book of Joshua, the first 12 chapters are a continual tale of genocidal conquest, killing anyone that breathed, leaving no survivors. Okay, this is tailor-made fuel and justification for aggressive genocide. Okay, I would like to draw to a conclusion. What are we to make? I mean, what am I trying to show by this biblical foundation in Zionist ideology? I'm not arguing for condemning the ancient text itself. That is to say, I'm not saying that because it has unpleasant, as it were, read from a modern present-day perspective, it has unpleasant passages, that because of this, the text should be rejected, not read, not taught at school, etc., etc. I think this is a fallacy. This is a fallacy called presentism, which wants to discard ancient myths, sagas, and epics because they don't pass the test of present-day standard of human rights and condemnation of war crimes. It is a silly aspect, a silly approach to such texts. If we apply this consistently, we should reject big chunks of treasures of common to all human culture. I mean, the Iliad, for one thing, will have to go. I mean, if you read the Iliad with this presentist approach, then a lot of it is disgusting. But it would be crazy to say, therefore, the Iliad shouldn't be read, shouldn't be taught, shouldn't be referred to, it should be simply condemned. This is absolutely to be rejected. I think these ancient texts, including the Hebrew Bible, but also other texts like the Iliad or the Mahabharata or the various other ancient epics should be read with detachment as simply as ancient texts that are not based on, do not follow modern standards of morality, etc. What is really dangerous is not the presentist fallacy of discarding these texts because they don't conform to present morality, but the converse of presentism, which is to regard these texts as applicable as templates for modern day practice. And this is, in fact, what is the case with the present messianic Zionist fanatics who are in charge of these present Israeli government. They actually take this text not seriously as the word of God, but also as a template for present day behavior, not as text dating from long ago, whose standards no longer apply, but should be taken as a cultural treasure, but as an operative template for present day behavior. I think this of course, has come in as a very useful ideological tool in the hands of these crazies. By the way, traditional rabbinical Judaism, which dominated the Jewish religion for centuries and centuries, took a very different attitude. The traditional rabbinical attitude to stories of conquest and so on was to take them as literally true. According to the rabbis, the stories of the Old Testament are literally true. However, they are not a template for present day conduct. On the contrary, the classical rabbinical Judaism regarded an attempt to repossess or possess the Holy Land in the present as a sacrilege and an absolute sin. This is why you see these ultra-religious Jews dressed in their traditional garb, participating in anti-Zionist demonstration. They follow the precepts of rabbinical Judaism, which was dominant in the Jewish religion for many centuries. What Zionism is doing is sinful. The Jews will go back to the Holy Land when the Messiah comes. Whether this will be a peaceful kind of movement or a warlike is beside the point. In fact, there is no stress in rabbinical Judaism that the Messiah will exterminate the indigenous people of Palestine. How this will happen, this is God's business. The ideology of present-day Messianic Zionists is a deviation, if you like, a sort of heresy from classical rabbinical Judaism. Okay, this is really all that I had to